The Darshana Shastras are the Indian systems of philosophy. They either subscribe to the Vedas or are not based on the Vedas. That is, they reject the Vedic authority, if one may say so. So schools that are based on the Vedas, or the systems that are based on the Vedas, are called Astika systems. And those that reject or are not based on the Vedas are the Nastika systems, which are Charvaka, Bauddha and Jaina. The Astika systems are further classified into Sankhya, Yoga, Nyaya, Vaisheshika, Purva Mimamsa and Uttara Mimamsa or Vedanta. Of these various systems of philosophies, the Darshana Shastras, Yoga occupies a very prominent position, because one thing that it is quite practical, that is, one can go through a set of practices which are aligned with the yoga philosophy and reach higher states of consciousness. And as a system, it helps us to remove the obstacles, cleanse the system of the obstacles or the problems or issues that prevent us from experiencing who we are. So that way, yoga as a philosophical system has held a very prominent position. The philosophy and practice of yoga is an invaluable gift of India to the world, and especially with the recognition of the International Day of Yoga. The philosophy and the practices, and in fact even the scientific aspects, are now available to the whole of the world to adopt, analyze, adapt, practice and refine themselves. So that way, the system of yoga is such a unifying force for the entire world and is a great tool of peace, love, kindness, because it transcends the limitations of the body and mind. It helps the practitioner to transcend these limitations, the upadhis or the vrittis that are constraining factors or conditionings. In the yogic system, the Patanjali Yogasutras again have a very important position, because in very terse and precise verses, very short verses, which are the sutras, Patanjali Maharishi conveys deep and profound thought process. It's a very, very powerful text, and sometimes when read or studied all by oneself, it can be quite complex to decode without the necessary preparation and without the necessary shraddha and the clarity that is provided by a guru. The Patanjali Yoga Sutras become very effective when studied and practiced in the setting of an ashrama, where the atmosphere is conducive to putting the sutras into practice, also gaining better clarity of them, understanding our own mental processes, becoming aware of them, and then transforming them so that we have a good experience of life. But however, not everybody has an access to an ashrama, not everybody has an access to a guru. So in modern times, books, videos and audios are becoming the first step towards learning the various dimensions of the Indian culture and tradition. So that way we would be adopting this medium to scratch the surface of the Yogasutra. To go really deep into it, it's going to take dedication of effort and time. But nevertheless, the first step is always important, and this would be the first step. Whenever we talk of yoga, one can look at it in different ways. The Yogasutra of Patanjali talks about yoga as yoga chitta vritti nirodha, that is, cessation of all conditionings of the mind is yoga. We'll look at it in more detail later on. The Bhagavad Gita talks about yoga in terms of action. Yoga karmasu kaushalam. Excellence in action is yoga. Or samatvam yoga muchyate. A certain equanimity is yoga. Maintaining a certain equanimity is yoga. So these three definitions of yoga help us to understand that achieving a certain union or unity or a unified aspect of the body, the mind, cognitive faculties is yoga. The Yogasutra of Patanjali is divided into 4 padas: Samadhi pada, Sadhana pada, Vibhuti pada and Kaivalya pada. The Samadhi pada consists of 51 verses, which talks about the definition, the purpose, and the vrittis or the mental modifications or conditionings that we have, and what can be the obstacles to progress. The Sadhana pada, which has 55 verses, talks about kleshas, how to remove these kleshas, that is what is not desirable, how do we remove that. And the Ashtanga yoga, that is the 8 components or limbs of yoga. The Vibhuti pada, which consists of 56 verses, talks about dharana, dhyana, samadhi, which are also part of the Ashtanga yoga. And it mainly talks about the various transformations of consciousness that occurs, that is parinama, that occurs in our system. The Kaivalya pada, which consists of 34 verses, talks about Kaivalya, that is that particular isolation and individuality that happens. It talks a lot about the theory of perception and unification of all things, that is the unity behind all things that we see, and the path to Kaivalya. The Yoga Sutras are designed so wonderfully. It's a wonderful pedagogical model, because it first talks about the state that is to be achieved, the goal to be achieved. What is the whole purpose of doing anything? It first talks about that. And then it goes on to tell, okay, if this is the purpose, what is preventing us from achieving that purpose? Now that we know what is preventing us, what do we do? So wonderful, isn't it? It would be so wonderful if we all understood the purpose of our education, what is preventing us from getting this good education or learning to happen, and then we go on to the action. That would be a fantastic pedagogical model as such. Again, as a pedagogical approach, Patanjali Maharishi has chosen the medium of sutras to elucidate or explain about these various dimensions. Sutras are short verses so that they allow easy memorization. So basically, if there is no way to write it down and pass it on from one generation to another, you could just rely on the oral approach, where these short verses are just memorized and then handed down from one generation to another. And these sutras, which are short verses, also become like a formula When we say A is equal to mc square, it's such a short thing. But then when you look at it, the whole dimension of physics opens up to you, isn't it? If you are a student of physics, if you are a researcher in physics, by just looking at this formula A is equal to mc square, the whole dimension opens up. So that way they become formulae in that sense, without using too many words that could be lost over a period of time. And also to avoid any kind of misinterpretation in the future, the brevity is maintained. It's like a poetical form, not in elaborate sentences, very, very short verses. And these bring out the essence of the philosophy of yoga, some of the practices that one can take forward, and those deep states that one can attain when these practices are adopted. So in these short sessions, we'll be looking at the Patanjali Yogasutra, verse by verse, and trying to decode a little bit of the meaning of the sutras.